Welcome to our brand new mini-series, Understanding Yu-Gi-Oh! In this series, I will bring you different episodes going through complicated aspects of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game. Stuff like when, if, mistiming, and paying cost, along with any more. If you have any particular areas of Yu-Gi-Oh! That you would like to understand a little bit more, please put them in the comments down below. I'll be more than happy to do that for you. With all of that out of the way, let's move on to this week's episode. So, thank you for joining me for episode 1 of the Understanding Yu-Gi-Oh! Mini-series. And episode 1, of course, we will start with one of the more complicated questions in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that is, what is cost? What does cost mean in Yu-Gi-Oh! Why is my opponent asking me, pay cost? Do you mean like how much I paid for my deck? No, we're asking you to pay a maintenance cost on the particular card you are attempting to activate. So, some of the examples that I'm going to bring you today are Pot of Desires. Its maintenance cost is banish 10 cards from the top of your deck before you can continue the chain of playing. Twin Twisters is to discard a card from your hand and then target 2 cards on the field. Obviously, spells and traps. That is your cost. You don't just go discard, target, destroy it all in one before your opponent can respond. You then also look at stuff like Solemn Warning, Solemn Judgment, where you pay life points first and then continue the chain, meaning your opponent still has a chance to negate that card. Sometimes costs aren't always going to be negative. They're not always going to be banish 10 cards. They're not always going to be discard a card. And they're not always going to be pay life points. Sometimes they can actually be beneficial for you in the forms of something like Cherubini and of course Magician's Souls that send from deck to graveyard as cost. Meaning that it can dodge certain aspects like Ash Blossom, and it can also dodge other aspects that basically say, don't let them do this. But I've already done it. I've paid my cost. You can't stop me doing that. So how do you identify what a cost is on a card? Well, a cost is actually is a bit of text followed by a semicolon. This will identify that it is a cost. This is identifying something that you need to pay in order to just generally play that card. Now, this doesn't count if your opponent was to negate the activation because you still need to pay that cost. So what you do, for example, is you would activate Pot of Desires. You need to banish before anything else happens in that particular standby or in that particular phase. Banish those 10 cards from the top of your deck. If your opponent was to then Ash Blossom, or if your opponent was to then activate something like Dark Bribe, a little bit silly, but we'll go with it, to negate the activation of Pot of Desires, you don't put the 10 cards back to the top of the deck. You have paid that cost already. It's kind of like going to a store going, I'll have that drink please, pay your money for that drink the drink, and then go, oh, can I have my money back please? Doesn't work that way. You pay the cost. That is it, done, dusted. Nothing your opponent will do will put those 10 cards back into the top of the deck unless they're going to play the Necro world. So, Necro phase. Why would you do that? Anyway, that is how costs work in Yu-Gi-Oh! They're all being identified, and there are cards that need to go to specific locations. So with cost, they do go into grey areas. Now what I mean by that is you need to be able to fulfill the cost of a card in order to activate it. In the example of Pot of Desires, if you do not have 10 cards on the top of the deck, you will lose the game. You will not be able to activate Desires because you cannot banish 10 cards from the top of the deck as cost. You can't pay the cost, which means you can't play the card. Quite like something else as well with Solemn Judgment, if you can't pay the 2,000 life points, you can't activate the card. I mean, I believe there's a grey area in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where technically you can activate it, but you'll lose, so why would you even do that? So they are what you need to be able to do. You need to be able to resolve the card's cost in order to play it. You can't play Twin Twisters without a discard, and then there is that dark little question with cost of, what if it needs to go to a specific location? So this is going to be a little bit of a quiz towards the end, where I'll give you guys some examples so you can test your knowledge and see if you have learnt from this video. So in regards to something that cost needs to go to a specific location, there's a bit of a grey area and a bit of a difference. So a card might have a clause of discard this card. Discard this card can go anywhere. It can go to the graveyard, it can go to the banish zone, it doesn't matter, the cost is to discard this card. If a card says discard this card to the graveyard and you're under something like D-Shifter, you can't activate it because you can't pay that cost of a card going from the hand to the graveyard. It will go to the banish zone, not the graveyard, meaning you can't actually even activate that card. So it's very important because you will unleash or you will provide your opponent with knowledge that they wouldn't already have known if you do not understand these little bits. That a full cost, like I said, is displayed by the semicolon, will display exactly what you need to be able to do in order to activate that card. So now that we've pretty much talked about what cost is and how you pay it, one thing that I always highly advise everyone to do as a mini note is to always make sure either yourself or your opponent finish paying your cost first before you do anything. So for example, if your opponent goes, activate twin twisters, target those 2 back row, but hasn't discarded, don't respond. Make sure they discard first, because number 1, they might forget to discard. Number 2, they might not actually be able to pay that cost in the first place. And number 3, if you rush, it might actually change what they're going to do. So for example, if you went, activate twin twisters, and then you went, chain or fiddled about with the card, they might change their attack targets. So before anything happens, wait. Let them finish paying the cost. Let them say anything on activation or anything after cost. That is when you have the time to think if you would like to respond with anything else. It will save you a lot of knowledge. It will save you a lot of trouble. So always make sure that you finish paying cost yourself and finish waiting for your opponent to pay cost in order to continue to resolve the chain. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples up on the screen, and I would like you to take a couple of seconds to answer them, whether or what exactly the cost is of a particular card, and I would then try and give you some red herrings of cards that don't actually have costs, but they actually resolve as effects, which will lead me back to cards having to go to a specific area. So let's start off with the easy one that I've been providing you guys all day. Pot of Desires! What's the cost of Pot of Desires? We'll give you a couple of seconds to work those out. If you want to take a little bit longer, by all means pause the video, but don't cheat, don't jump ahead. Okay, so yes, that is the answer. It is a banish 10 cards as cost. You don't banish 10 cards and draw 2 cards as cost. You banish 10 cards first and you wait for a response. If there is no response, then you can draw 2 cards. Let's look at the Albaz more commonly used fusion monster of Lubellion. What is the cost on Lubellion? Give you a couple of seconds to work that one out. And if you said discard a card from your hand, you would be completely correct. There has been so many times I've watched duels going on with Lubellion where they go chaining 1 Lubellion, chaining 2 Tragedy in the graveyard, and they haven't even discarded a card yet. You need to go, whoa, 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 slow down. Chainlink 1 Lubellion, discard a card. Chainlink 2, Tragedy in the graveyard, any response. That then makes it sure that it is clean, it is clear, and it is to the point that there is no grey areas that you can be called a judge on or anything like that. Okay, sticking on with the fusion theme, let's look at Shaddoll Fusion. What is the cost on Shaddoll Fusion? That's right, if you actually answered there was no cost on Shaddoll Fusion, you would be completely correct. There is no cost on Shaddoll Fusion. As you see, it is only a trigger effect in order to use cards from your deck to the graveyard, but there is no cost. You don't send your Shaddolls from the deck to the graveyard as cost. You don't send the Shaddolls from your hand to the graveyard as cost. This is a little bit of a red herring because I wanted to kind of put this in here to show you an example of when a card doesn't need to maintain or doesn't always have a cost. It also shows you the difference between being allowed to activate a card that has send to a specific location in its effect and not being able to activate a card that has send to the graveyard as a cost. So when a card like Shaddoll Fusion, if you were under D-Shifter, you would be able to still activate and send materials from your deck. However, they would get banished instead because you're sending as part of the effect resolution. Again, the exact same thing. If Shaddoll Fusion actually said, send 2 cards from your deck to the graveyard, semicolon, and then fusion summon a Shaddoll monster or then fusion summon a monster, you would not be able to use it because your cards, in order to pay that cost, need to be able to go to the graveyard. Now this is a bit of a weird example. For example, if you went to a shop and they said, we can only accept cash today, and you're like, yeah, but I want to pay you £5 via PayPal. And they'll be like, well, no, we can't accept that £5 in PayPal, which means you can't have this product you're trying to buy. We can only accept cash. That is basically the form of paying cost and needs to go to a specific location. So in order for me to get that product, my money needs to go from physically to me, physically to the place I'm trying to purchase to. I can't try and send it digitally. However, when you're looking to pay as a part of an effect, the cost doesn't need to be met. So that's basically like going to a shop and saying, okay, I'd like to purchase that. And they're like, yeah, sure. How would you like to pay? Card, PayPal, or would you like to pay by cash? It gives you all the options. It doesn't need to end up in the graveyard because it doesn't need to be part of the cost. I know that bit's a little bit confusing, but just try and remember that costs need to fulfill their entire effect. You need to be able to discard and target in order to resolve Twin Twisters. You can't just go activate Twin Twisters, discard a card, but there's nothing on the field to target. That doesn't work. They need to be able to fulfill their entire cost in order to activate, and then ideally you need to be able to resolve the card as well. Okay, moving on to the last one in these little mini quizzes, and then I'll give you an example because I want to ask you a question and see if you can get it in the scenario that I'm going to play out for you. So, in this final question, we are going to go with Magician Souls because, darn Magician fans, why not? What is the cost for Magician Souls? Already gone through it in the video. If you need to go back, by all means, please go and do so. If you answered send a spellcaster level 6 or higher from your deck to the graveyard, you would be correct. It does not summon as cost. It does not summon itself as cost. It would actually survive it back. You will get a bonus point if you actually said there's 2 cost effects on Magician Souls, because that would be completely correct as well. The first cost is being able to summon it, send it from deck to the graveyard as cost. The second is while it is on the field, you have to send spells and traps from your field or hand to the graveyard as cost before you draw, meaning you can't just go activate Magician Souls and they go Ash. You go, cool, I get to keep my spells and traps. No. If you activate Magician Souls effect on the field, again, wait for your opponent. So if my opponent activated Magician Souls effect on the field, I'm not going to go Ash Blossom because then they might change their targets they're going to send off their spells and traps. With Magician Souls, they have to pay the cost first. So you need to go, okay, I'm going to put 1 or 2 into the graveyard, and then you go, okay, cool, Ash, and they stop them drawing. If you do it a little bit prematurely as well, they might just send 1 rather than 2. Okay, we're going to move on to our final scenario. Now, this is all going to be about cards having to go to a specific location. So I hope you've paid attention. Okay, so the scenario is as follows. I have Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring in my hand, and I have Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit in the hand. My opponent has a face-up Dimension Fissure on the board. Dimension Fissure says any monster sent to the graveyard is banished instead. He then proceeds to normal summon Aluba. Don't know why, but we'll go with it. I would like to use one of my hand traps in my hand in order to stop the Aluba or to get Aluba off the board. Which hand trap can I legally activate in this scenario? I'll give you a couple of minutes to figure this one out, and I've also put a graphic up on the screen so you can see the current board state and which one we try to use. Right, so if you answered Ghost Ogre, unfortunately you are incorrect. Now the reason you are incorrect on the Ghost Ogre is for the pure fact that it says this card needs to be discarded or specifically sent from the field or hand to the graveyard, semicolon. That is your cost. I cannot send Ghost Ogre to the graveyard because it will be banished under Dimension Fissure, meaning I cannot pay the cost in order to activate it on my opponent's Aluba. However, I can activate Ash Blossom because Ash Blossom just says discard this card. It doesn't matter where it goes as long as it is discarded. I'm now going to provide you with a final scenario because I feel this one is actually going to be very, very relevant for upcoming formats and ways of trying to play around it. So, my board is currently going to be Herald of the Arc Light and a couple of other cards that my opponent would like to attempt to negate. My opponent activates Forbidden Droplet. His hand, doesn't really matter what his hand is actually, this is going to be an interesting one. What types of cards can he send from his hand or her legally in order to try and negate Herald of the Arc Light? Now keep this in mind as well that Forbidden Droplet sends as cost, and Herald of the Arc Light, as you'll see on the screen, specifically says any monster sent from the main deck or hand to the graveyard is banished instead. So only being able to use his hand, not or her, not the field, what cards can be sent from the hand to the graveyard, and then overall, can he actually negate the Herald? Give you a couple of seconds to work this one out. Okay, so for those of you that said he can send anything from his hand to the graveyard, it doesn't matter because Herald will end up being negated. The answer is incorrect. They will not be able to send any monster from the hand to the graveyard in order to attempt to negate the Herald because it will be banished instead, and because Droplet sends as cost, they will not be able to do that. So the correct answer is they can send spells or traps because they will not be banished under Herald, and the effect of droplets would then be able to resolve to attempt to negate the Herald. Of course, I could chain the Herald if I wanted to try and protect multiple monsters. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty much it for the video. I hope these examples, I hope these little quiz bits have helped you learn this a little bit more. If there's any improvements I can make on this particular type of video, then please let me know in the comments down below. And if there are any burning questions you would like to know, or any type of terminology that you would like me to go over, whether it be the if, when, and missing timing effects, or anything like that, then please put them in the comments down below, and I'll be more than happy to do that for you. With all of that out of the way, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share. Till next time, guys, as absolutely always, stay safe, and of course, happy dueling!